Welcome to Vanilla Club Podcast, where we, as lay people, discuss scaling effects and talk about the hidden complexities that arise from our very scaled world in many different dimensions. So today on the podcast, we have Nicola Coalter, psychologist, behavioral scientist, and practitioner at Pragmatic Practice in Darwin, Northern Territory. We'll take a moment to acknowledge Indigenous voices, special acknowledgement for Indigenous Australians and their traditional custodianship and continuing connection to land, waters, and country. And with that, welcome, Nicola. Thank you again so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you for having me, Jason. Really excited to be here.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'll just give you a little bit of background about us. We as Vanilla Club are organic vanilla producers in North Queensland. We produce a few very, happily made, handmade local products in our vanilla extract, our vanilla paste. We do an infused balsamic vinegar and a vanilla honey. So this podcast series, again, we're really excited to meet with some experts in various fields who are doing exciting work with regards to fields that we would consider are related to complexity, that confront some of the scaling effects in our world. So we're really excited to talk to you today about online addiction and some of the effects that we're starting to see in so many different dimensions related to the gamification of so many aspects of life. So maybe we can just start off by painting a little bit of a picture about Australia and gambling, because I've been living full-time in Australia for about 4 years. And one of the first things that I noticed was that hotels in Australia aren't exactly hotels. In many ways, when you say hotel in Australia, you're actually talking about a pub, it's a meeting place, there's dining, but there's very much a thing called pokies. So maybe you could just help us understand what is the overall picture for gambling in Australia?
That's a really big question, I suppose. But look, picture this, Jason. Australia's got more poker machines than anywhere outside of Nevada. We're like 0.3% of the world's population, but we've got 20% of the world's pokies. Wow. You walk into your local pub, your local club, the same place that maybe your grandparents went to for bowls or for a cheap Sunday roast. And half of the floor space is glowing, spinning machines engineered to keep you there. Yep. Now that's just one part of it. On top of that, you can watch footy. You can't watch footy without being sold the odds. You can't stream a game without gambling logos filling your screen. And on your phone, betting apps that never close and track every single click. Per capita, Australians lose more to gambling than anyone else on earth, over $31 billion a year. And Jason, did you know that's more money than we spend on aged care? And that's not by accident. These aren't neutral products. They're designed with the science of reinforcement to keep you chasing, playing, and losing. So, when you hear the phrase, Australia's the lucky country, well, when it comes to gambling, we're actually the laboratory, the world's testing ground for how far you can push people when the guardrails are weak and the profits are strong.
That's a breathtaking place to dive in, because when you paint that picture, Australia is, in a sense, attempting a distributed model of gambling, right? Where it's, and we're seeing this around the world, whereby it used to be Las Vegas was the one place that you could go and you had to travel there, and it was a big thing. And once you entered the state, there was a poker machine at the airport. How exciting. There was a poker machine at the bus stop. Oh, how exciting. And then you do your trip, you most likely lose some money, but you had some fun and you went back home and that was it. But the picture that you're painting is a much more pervasive, distributed, always on 24/7, fully gamified life.
Well, you're talking about, scaling. Pokies came to Australia in the late 50s, but they were really small scale back then, mostly in New South Wales clubs and pitched really as fundraising for sport and community. By the 90s, they were everywhere. Victoria and Queensland legalised them, and suddenly just about every pub and club had a mini casino bolted onto it. So what was sold as community fundraising turned into a national industry. Today, we've got over 160,000 machines, more than Las Vegas, sitting in suburbs. Not in one big casino that you can avoid or that you can fly to, that's a destination. And as you said, you might head on in. Sure, you might lose a buck or two. But then you leave and you travel back home. And home is far away. It's not around the corner. But what we now have is in places where people go every day, to their local pub, to their RSL, even to their golf club, to their surf lifesaving club. Pokies went from a novelty to part of the wallpaper, and that's how Australia became the world's biggest losers per head on machine. So that's just pokies, but we've got a lot of other gambling activities here in Australia. And we are known as liking to have a punt, and that's deeply tied into after colonisation of risk and mateship and reward and the diggers, but it's certainly scaled up from then.
Absolutely, and that's it's so interesting when you put it that way, because my sense would be that having a punt with your mates, the way that these apps like a PointsBet app, if you see Shaquille O'Neal, I'm wearing a Lakers hat today. I grew up, he's one of my childhood heroes, and then I see him on the PointsBet app advertisement. And he is portraying this as, well, it's just sort of, having a punt with your friends, your mates, you go to the pub and it's portrayed in such a innocuous way. It's portrayed in such a family-friendly almost way. And is that the point? Is that what we're being sold? That it's just have a punt and she'll be right?
Look, having a flutter at the pub with a mate can look harmless, like grabbing the occasional burger. Mm-hmm. But scale it up with engineered products, cheap access, our role models, our fans that we love, marketed everywhere. And, suddenly you've got an obesity epidemic. Gambling works exactly the same way. When Shaq fronts a betting ad, he's not selling odds. He's selling familiarity. Behaviorally, that's so powerful. You take a global icon and drop him into screens, wrap him in humor, and suddenly betting feels like culture, not commerce. That's not by accident. That's conditioning. Every laugh, every replay is another reinforcement that gambling is normal and fun. And when you scale that across every sport, every screen, it stops being just an ad and it actually becomes the air we breathe.
Mm-hmm. And I also noticed something in the advertisements where the disclaimer, the government warning, it happens right at the end. Whereas I can say in the States, the format is a little bit different, that the disclaimer is embedded inside of the ad, so that you see the ad and then it will say something. I mean, more akin to a smoking warning. Whereas what I've noticed in Australia is that you see the ad and then they have, 7 seconds at the end with the black screen in that very warning font. Don't risk more than you can handle. Da, 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 da. But to the viewer, my sense of it is that, like watching this with my kids, they look at that as a separate ad. They don't necessarily mentally associate that with the Shaq ad itself.
It's a really interesting thing that you're saying, especially when you bring in kids and so they don't associate it with the ad. To them, that's a whole different ad. They've already switched off from the shack. Because responsible gambling, and I think there's 7 different formats of responsible gambling messages here in Australia, it's the industry's favourite phase because it shifts the blame onto individuals. Behaviourally, it ignores the reality. These products are engineered with reinforcement loops, with near misses, with inducements that keep people coming back, keep people playing, even when they wanted to stop. It's like selling cigarettes with extra nicotine and then saying, smoke responsibly. You know, the responsibility can't just sit with the person when we come up into harmful products. It has to sit with the systems and the products as well.
So how does the world look like as a behavioral scientist? What are some of the core precepts that a behavioral scientist carries with them, you know, in their toolbox?
Look, you know, I see the world through a behaviourist lens for sure. That means I don't just look at what people do. I look at the environments that shape them. Behaviours follow environments, and environments are full of cues, reinforcement, and traps designed to push us one way or another. Yeah? Pokies, apps, advertising, none of it's neutral. It's built on the same behavioural principles I studied in labs, variable rewards, conditioning, reinforcement schedules. So when I talk about gambling, I'm not talking about weak people making bad choices. I'm talking about strong systems designed to exploit very human behaviours, the world as the behaviourist sees it. If individual responsibility worked, we'd never be going back to the fridge for the second Tim Tam.
Absolutely. But it's hard to stop once you've had that first Timmy.
It is hard to stop. There's many reasons why it's hard to stop. Again, back through that lens of a behaviourist, behaviour follows environments. And right now, our gambling environments aren't designed for fun. They're designed for extraction.
So when a gambling company is petitioning, lobbying the government for something, my presumption would be that it's probably more in their interest to use an economic framework that goes back to your previous comment that, oh, if people lose, well, basically they're weak-willed and you know what, it's kind of their thing. They would be less likely to say, well, these are some of the environmental factors that we need to consider. These are some of the psychological things that we need to consider. They would much more readily, you know, sort of sidestep some of those things because of how damning some of the evidence that's emerging is. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. When we talk about gambling companies lobbying for something, it's not about protecting people. It's about protecting their revenue, their bottom line. We know that every submission, every campaign, every glossy, responsible gambling ad is designed to delay reform and keep the extraction system intact. So that's behaviourism too. They're shaping the political environment to reinforce their own survival. So right now, we've let gambling companies regulate themselves, essentially. It's like asking tobacco companies to write smoking laws or, you know, the breweries to set the drink driving limits. They'll always design rules that look good on paper and protect their profits first. Any business would. Real regulation only works when it's independent.
Do you see more overlap and more blurring between games and gambling?
Oh, look, that's been around for a little while. So I have adult children. My youngest child is 28 and my oldest is 30, and they grew up with Pokemon. And so we know that gambling has been a part of gamification since pretty much back then in the beginning, yeah. Games are built for play, gambling is built for profit, but there does become a blurred line. You know, I could say to all parents out there now just sitting listening in and thinking of scale, Yeah, maybe you, as a young person, as a teenager, or maybe even your parents as a young person and a teenager went to arcades and it cost 20 cents for a game, sometimes up to $1. And through the 90s, those arcade places and businesses, they all changed, and we lost a lot of them because we moved into computer games. I think Doom was the first one that changed everything in the arcade space. From there, we've also moved into more gamification, and gamification always has gambling involved. You go to your local time zone and check out a skill tester. It has the same kind of principles at play for rewards, and they're engineered so it feels like we're never done. Yeah. That we need to go back. And so play and exploitation are a little bit different, but fundamentally, I think it was Len Ainsworth. He was the creator or built the company Aristocrats. And he's been quoted many times in public sources as saying he made a better mousetrap.
A mousetrap that has built into it a lot of fear of missing out, a lot of elements of probably some very primal elements of status and, ranking. I mean, if you go to time zone, I mean, you can get the kids in, but you can't get them out. They'll be kicking and screaming because, oh no, I just want to rank up. I only got 17. Maybe I can beat it. I can get to number 10. So all of these cues, it seems like to the average punter, to the lay person, maybe this is incidental, but what you're saying is that no, this is not incidental. This is they probably have plenty of skilled people like yourself trained in these methods on the other side, using these same skill sets, but using it to gate people in.
These cues are not accidental at all. They're lifted straight from gambling's playbook. Loot boxes are basically slot machines for kids. Ask your kids about a loot box, yeah? The bright lights, the sound effects when you win, the near misses when you almost got the rare item. Those are reinforcement schedules 101. And when we talk about children and grooming the next generation, we're grooming them for gambling. These products, these environments don't happen by accident. They are by design. When we think about near misses, on poker machines, when we think about daily streaks with Keno, when we think about loot boxes, they're built on the same behavioural science that we know makes pokies addictive. It's that variable reinforcement, those cues, those nudges, engineered to keep you coming back. We dress it up as just a game, a little bit of a flutter, a punt, but the truth is it's conditioning. And by the time someone's old enough to gamble legally, if they've been going to time zones and you've been grabbing them and they've been yelling and kicking on the way out, by the time they're old enough to gamble legally, the groundwork has already been laid.
Really, I think whether we're parents, whether we're just average citizens, and certainly if you're a policymaker, I mean, we have to pay attention. There's been my sense, just even talking about some of these themes at the macro level, there's also been a big shift in what is normal, because you mentioned it earlier about this interlinkage between sports and gambling, which to me is a great cause for concern. And I've actually been very frustrated by the fact that my kids they watch a game of footy, they watch we watch baseball, we watch basketball, and as you mentioned earlier, the odds are displayed on the screen. And that linkage used to be, in my coming of age, there was a firewall between those things. If you wanted to place a bet, you had to call a bookie, you had to do something. It was a bit furtive. It was never sort of fully mainstream, and there was something a bit cloak and dagger about it. And maybe that was a good thing, right? Because that was in this lower scale world. Nowadays, you watch the game, you can place bets, it's not like you have to place it before the game. I mean, there's in-game bets that happen all the way to the final play.
It's not accidental. Gambling, talking about gambling in sports, gambling ads in sports, having commentators drop the odds into their commentary, it isn't accidental. It's about conditioning. Every logo on a Guernsey, every odd update in commentary, every flashing banner in a stadium, that's normalisation by design. I mentioned before, behaviour follows cues, and the industry has filled sports with cues. What looks like sponsorship is actually a strategy to make betting feel as natural as cheering for your team. It's not culture evolving, it's culture engineered.
So if that's the sort of situation, that's the what's happening, in the macro world. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot, maybe in your practice, from the standpoint of somebody who's suffering gambling addiction? What are the impacts that you are seeing, and what are the recovery processes that are available to somebody who may suffer from some version of gambling addiction?
Yes, I've been working in gambling harm and in community organisations, and more recently in a private practice over the last 5 years. So in my practice, I see the human cost of this design. People don't walk away saying, I'm addicted to gambling ads. They come in with shame, with debt, with relationships on the line. They talk about sleepless nights, lying to their partners, missing rent. But shame grows in silence. And we were talking a little bit before just about responsible gambling and the industry's narrative. I think one of the hardest parts I see in practice is shame. Gambling thrives in silence. People don't talk about it because they feel weak or stupid or embarrassed. Families hide it. Friends don't ask. And so the person stays stuck. Shame is sticky. It keeps people quiet. It stops them from reaching for help. From a behaviourist view, silence is part of the environment that maintains the cycle. The less we talk, the more harm grows in the shadows. So shame is a real currency of this system, and the antidote is voice. So speaking it, naming it, breaking the silence. Mostly when people talk about gambling, they're talking about the wins. I don't know many people who in everyday conversations will be talking about their losses. But gambling has a huge ripple effect. So not only the shame for the individual, and it's not only the consequences felt by the individual. Gambling ripples. It ripples through families, into communities, and it looks like the kid at school who can't go on the excursion. It looks like the mum and dad who haven't been on a holiday for years. It looks like the family who can't have some do-it-yourself home renovation projects going on. So the harm from gambling, as I said, doesn't land on one person at the machine or with the app. It ripples out. Kids missing out on food, partners living with secrecy, workplaces losing good staff, whole communities hollowed out when money meant for sports or connection is siphoned into machines or through apps. So we know from research that one person's losses can ripple out and become 6, 10, 15 people's burden. That's why it's not just an individual issue, it is a societal issue. With gambling, no one loses alone. The ripples always spread. When we talk about recovery, from a behaviourist lens again, I'm a behaviourist. I sit firmly in the school of behaviourism. So gambling and recovery, change from gambling isn't a straight line. Like change from most things, whether it be alcohol, drugs, stress, doom scrolling, gambling, pornography, it's not linear. And it's not just about stopping the activity. It's not just about stopping gambling. It's about often rebuilding trust with self, with others, rebuilding identity and safety. In my practice, recovery looks like people learning to speak out, people expanding supports in their networks, and people really looking at what guardrails they can put in place for themselves. It's also, about being able to have conversations with our loved ones and speak our truth. And often that can be very, very hard, especially if there's huge amounts of money that are now gone and people didn't realize someone was gambling. It's also about, learning to self-soothe. It's learning to manage our stress without spinning a reel. Recovery means also redesigning our environments, putting friction between us and the gambling, putting in place blocks and doing what we can. So we start to strengthen new cues for our own connection and our self-soothing and for joy. Fundamentally, it's about relearning how to get that reinforcement, those quick dopamine hits from life itself, not from gambling products. The recovery isn't just about the absence of gambling. It's really coming back into our own and into the presence of safety and trust and new ways of living and being.
Thank you for the poignancy of the human impacts. I think people really need to hear that, and we need to talk about that, because my sense of it is that the impacts, the sort of structure of the gambling industry is such that, it's not just lots and lots and lots and lots of people losing a little bit. It's highly skewed to some 10% of the heaviest gamblers who are absolutely in an abyss of a situation where they are gambling way too much, going into debt. And again, the shame compounds. They can't talk about it. And we also have this feedback loop in the system whereby the gambling companies benefit from that asymmetry, right? More people talk about it. Oh yeah, I won. And then I tell my mates and, I broadcast that as widely as possible. But then for those who lose, and they're losing a lot, they are actually the ones who are totally silent. So we've got this mammoth feedback loop that now it's scaled up. Government is 5 steps behind, and it's up to average citizens without many policy guardrails to now come in and do this. I mean, do the work that you're doing.
So again, from the behaviourist view, the environment really matters. Pubs have last drinks, bottle shops shut, and even your local drug dealer, they go to sleep. The gambling apps, they never close. They follow you home at 3 a.m. when most people are very vulnerable. That reinforcement loop is still running. It's not entertainment. That's a predator that never sleeps, not by chance, engineered by designs. When you think about algorithms, they turn gambling into this personalized lab experiment. Every loss, every click, every pause in play is tracked and used to pull you back in. A system that studies your weaknesses in real time isn't offering choice. It's like hunting. That's not gambling. That's manipulation at scale. It's been 2 years since we've had the Murphy report. It's called for a ban on gambling ads, had 31 recommendations, bipartisan support, and strong public backing. Something like 75% of Australians want gambling reform in this country. What's changed? A few tweaks around the edges, but big reforms still sitting on a shelf. And why? Because lobby groups, sporting codes, and political donations have more weight in Canberra than public health. We know the government isn't short on evidence, it's short on will to stand up to an industry that bankrolls campaigns and saturates sports with money. Australians are now losing over $31 billion a year to gambling, almost on par with what we spend on the entire aged care system. I think that's actually $36 billion, yeah. The Australian Medical Association has called it a public health failure, pointing out we now lose more to gambling than we spend on caring for our older people. Per capita, no one else in the world comes close to our losses. And, we're sitting here, and from my behaviourist view, those billions aren't the sum of free choices. They're the result of environments designed to extract, products built to keep people playing long after they wanted to stop. That's not luck, it's engineered loss.
That's exactly where this conversation needs to go. The underlying mismatch, I think, between the scaled systems that we have to defend against, that we have to manage as individuals. So it's one individual, one family, one community, and it's not just the pub, down the road. It's the algorithmic, systematic, software-driven, financially connected, listed companies that are very much seeing the benefits financially of all that interconnectedness. But when we talk about it, that's why I think those human impacts that you discussed are so vital for us to hear. Because as you said, this is shame lives in silence. And it's one thing if you overeat those Tim Tams, to use that reference that you made earlier, you might get extremely overweight, and there might be some visual cues to your addiction. If you're a meth addict, maybe you start losing your teeth. If you abuse alcohol, there may be some visible signs. But gambling is extremely insidious, because I think to the outside world sometimes, well, he's just going down to the pub, or she's just going down to the pub. The footy match is on. We're just going to get a beer, and then I'm just going to sneak over to the pokies area, and as you said, just have a flutter. But I've actually hit 100 times on the bet, and that's my weekly paycheck in one press.
On an individual level, people blame themselves. And we've had an industry tell us that we should gamble responsibly. So like when you mentioned before, alcohol, we can't get heavily intoxicated in any licensed venue in Australia. We will be cut from the bar. We will be asked to leave. We will be provided some water, some ways home. But we can't always see gambling harm. One person sitting at a machine, as you described, is just going in for a quick flutter. But when you've got max limits and speeds that are so fast, the Productivity Commission found back in 2010 that a person betting could lose $1,200 an hour. This is a huge amount of money, and that was 2010. Fast forward 15 on years, and we've got poker machines on steroids. Sports betting is scaled to the max on the same kind of behavioural cues. So what's really tricky about gambling now is that very much that concept of ambient betting in the background. You don't even have to seek it out anymore. It's just there. I've had one client tell me before that he'd be walking up and down the aisles of Bunnings, kids in tow with the little kind of trolleys, having the best time ever, wife with her list of things that she needed. And he was totally distracted, making bets, listening for the results. Ambient betting, always in the background. It's woven into sports commentary, even in halftime analysis. Odds slide across our screens, like you said before, and we barely even notice. And that's the real danger. It's not big, conscious decisions to go and place a bet. It's this drip, drip, drip cues in the background that constantly shape our behaviour without us even realising it.
And you say ambient, it's such a relevant word there, because it's the Uber driver who downloads the betting app, not necessarily to bet, but because it's a free way to watch the footy. He doesn't have to pay for the subscription service. I realize there is this loophole that dozens of people I know use. They download the betting app, which gives them live sports for free. But if we take anything of what you're saying, None of that is free. None of that is free. Those free cash, rewards, the sort of $20 free to come in and, just spend it, have a punt, and it's up to you what you do with it. You could delete the app right away. But I'm sure that with scale, they've realized that, okay, there might be, 9 out of 10 people that use the $20 and they delete the app. And then there's one who does 20, and then 200 and 2,000 and 20,000. And it's worth losing the first 9 just to get that one whale.
That's the hook, right? Download the app, it's free. But it isn't free. The moment it's on our phone, our environment has changed. Now it's in our pocket. 24/7, buzzing with notifications, tracking our behaviour, dangling offers in front of us, especially when we're most vulnerable. And most vulnerable could look like being really bored. From a behaviourist view, that's the moment the reinforcement loop starts. The free entry is just the trigger. Free to download, but designed to cost you.
Absolutely. So on our very first episode, we had Dr. Alex Wodak, and we had a lovely show there. And I enjoyed interacting and chatting with Dr. Alex so much. And we got to learn a little bit about harm reduction. And I wanted to ask you just a little bit about applying harm reduction to gambling addiction. How can we, or how should we, how could we, let's say that we are not necessarily specialists. I'd like your specialist opinion, but again, should we just save some of the moralizing? For if we have a loved one who suffers from some impulse, lack of impulse control when it comes to gambling, would it be helpful to hold back a little bit about judgment?
So privileged to have been on a podcast. Dr. Alex Wodak has been on, absolutely my modern day hero. The danger with gambling, like alcohol, drugs, even obesity, is that moralizing creep. It slips in with words like weakness and discipline and just stop, which is very seductive for policymakers because it looks like action, but it actually lets the system off the hook. So from a behaviourist point of view, moralizing blames the individual. You didn't gamble responsibly, whereas harm reduction changes the environment. Let's make sure the products aren't built to exploit you. So how do we save moralizing, or rather stop ourselves from going down that path so we keep focus on systems, not souls? It's not about good or bad people. It's about environments deliberately designed to keep people stuck. We can borrow language from public health. Tobacco wasn't a moral failing. It was a product engineered for addiction. Same with pokies, same with betting apps. We can name the trap. Responsible gambling is a moral frame. It suggests if harm happens, it's your fault. A better frame is safe products, safe systems, safe environments. We can show the ripple effect. Gambling harm isn't just the gambler's issue, as we've talked about. It's families, it's kids, it's workplaces, it's community trust. That moves the story out of individual morality and into public health. So like when we moralize gambling, we're pointing the finger at the person. When we see it as a public health issue, we point the finger at the system. One blames, the other actually fixes.
If we continue down that logic, would that suggest that there are alternates to gambling? There are less harmful games, for example, that we could advocate for. There are more community friendly, more, in a sense, descaled games of chance that we might offer. One thing that Dr. Alex talked with us about is if you look at vaping and the reduced harm that it, in aggregate causes as opposed to combustion and smoking, maybe as a policy, we should somehow not try to outlaw this act of consuming nicotine, but try to redirect it towards the less harmful activity.
So harm reduction in gambling means putting up the guardrails, things that reduce harm without pretending we can eliminate gambling harm together. And I'm not about eliminating gambling completely. But when we look at some of the gambling products we have, so for example, pokies in land-based venues, we know that in the real world, what will work, instead of pointing the finger at the individual, is reducing operating hours or having mandatory machine shutdowns for periods of time, lowering maximum bet limits, slowing the spin rate, removing those predatory features, near misses, losses disguised as win. So a near miss is, when you get two of a symbol and the third one you can see just off the screen, it was never coming. But that's a predatory feature. Losses disguised as wins are when you're betting $1 a press and you get a win that says 20 cents and all the lights and whistles go. So they are predatory features. We could remove them from the design. We can also reduce machine numbers, especially in vulnerable communities. Across Australia, we know that the highest density of machines are in our lowest and most lowest socioeconomic areas and our most vulnerable communities. Yeah. When we look at online gambling, in particular apps for sports betting, we could have an instant panic stop button to freeze play and withdrawals. We could have mandatory pre-commitment, so setting time and money limits. We could also have that in land-based venues. We could have real-time harm alerts. So, for example, opportunities where it pops up and says you've been playing for 2 hours, you have now just lost $2,000 on your Saturday races. We could have those things. We could have cooling off periods after losses. We could have universal self-exclusion across all forms of gambling. Sure, in the online environment and sports betting now we do have BetStop, which is a national self-exclusion register for people. But, unlike alcohol and drugs where independent regulators set the rules, gambling harm reduction has pretty much been left up to the industry, the very people profiting from the harm. So from a behaviourist view, harm reduction is about shaping the environment so those risky behaviour doesn't tip into harm. Yeah, so when you think about alcohol, that's things like last drinks at the bar. That's about having blood alcohol content limits for driving and breath tests on the road. They were the rules that changed when and how people drink, yeah. With drugs, it's pill testing, needle exchanges or safe injecting spaces, as I'm sure Dr. Wodak talked about, interventions that change the condition of use. With fast food, it's portion sizes, nutrition labelling, and even limiting junk food ads to kids. That way we know we reduce overconsumption. But, in an industry like gambling, an environment is largely designed by the industry. So instead of those independent guardrails, things like mandatory limit settings, safer product design, slower machines, removing those predatory features, or even, 24-hour stop buttons on apps. We mostly get slogans and glossy kind of gamble responsible campaigns. They're created by the industry safer gambling teams, which isn't harm reduction. It's marketing dressed up as care. People have always gambled. We've gone back into history. And since the early days after colonisation, and even before colonisation, the Macassan traders came to Australia and there was gambling like games going on then. So it's always been a part of our culture, but what we're seeing now is gambling on steroids, that upscale, that is by design, and that is absolutely capturing us. So I'm not sure vaping as moving it into a less harmful way, but there's certainly things we can do with the products that we have to make them safer, instead of pointing the finger at the individual and telling them to just stop or gamble responsibly by a system that was designed to capture them and extract from them.
Absolutely. What about if we drop down in scale to, you mentioned your adult children, but for parents with younger kids, what should parents be thinking about in this new environment that we're talking about, this edge of this new AI boom, where presumably all of these feedback loops that we've been talking about are only going to get more entangled.
As a parent, you're already teaching your kids about limits, probably limits like things like screen time or limits with bedtimes, maybe even limits with sugar. Gambling really isn't any different. But the problem is the cues are now saturating our environments. So when odds are read out in the footy, or when logos are on the jerseys or ads pop up between cartoons, really important opportunity to have a conversation with your young person. Ask them those open questions. What do you think that's all about? What do your mates say about this? Have you and your friends started talking about this? From a behaviourist view, when we just let repetition play in the background, that really normalizes it, and kids learn what's normal by what they see around them. So I think some of the best things a parent could do is just to talk about it openly and early, the same way you'd talk about healthy eating or safe driving. Keep it curious, not scary. Ask, what do you notice about those ads during the game? Why do you think the odds are always shown? That way you're helping your kids see the design. The gambling companies want their attention rather than making it about shame or secrecy. From a behaviourist view, once kids can spot the cues, they're less likely to be conditioned by them. So it's about inoculating them with awareness. So talk about gambling with your kids the way you'd talk about junk food. Notice the ads, name the tricks, and show them it's designed to hook them.
I don't know if it's a good strategy. We will see as my kids get older, but my approach is also to use some humor and to poke fun at how stupid some of these ads are and how stupid you have to be. And I'm very direct and blunt with them about the fact that, you gamble on these apps, you're going to lose. There's a few cases where, okay, maybe someone wins, but that's in the case where you have the flutter and, okay, you win and then you stop. But anyone who plays over time is going to lose. It's just statistically impossible. The house edge maybe with blackjack is, I don't know, 3%, something like that. But when you talk about these gambling apps, from my understanding, they're also shunting people towards some of the most profitable bets, the really stupid ones that seem fun. And when you around your mates, will the kicker miss the kick by more than 10 meters, something like that. It's fun, it's whatever, and it pays whatever. But those, from my understanding, are in fact, those stupid fun bets are actually some of the most profitable ones for the gambling companies. And that's where they want you to bet. So I've used humor. I don't know if my kids appreciate that too much, but I try to call it like it is.
Humor's a great conversation starter. Humor's a great connector, and we know that humor can work in therapy as well. So, using that humor hook, look, the house edge is basically the world's worst loyalty system. The longer you play, the more you lose, and your reward is losing slower.
Losing slower.
Yeah, losing slower.
That is great. That's a great way of putting it, and then, you've got the benefits and everything like this. But I mean, Nicola, if you look even at the rewards programs, right? The thing about the rewards programs, I mean, even when we go to the supermarket and you spend the points and then the kids get the little cards or they get the little cartoon characters. I mean, isn't that another form of hooking someone? Isn't that building in a system whereby instead of actually going to shop for something that is food that my family needs and everything like this, I'm creating all of this excess, appendages that I'm stumbling into. And then all of a sudden now the kids are telling me, oh no, let's go back to the supermarket, not because we need anything, but because we want more reinforcement.
Yeah, look, the duopoly of the two supermarkets in this country, absolutely. They give you, they say you spend a fortune on groceries and eventually you get a voucher. We give you some money off your groceries. We give you something, a toaster, maybe a set of steak knives if you're lucky. It's silly, but it's harmless. But flip that into gambling. You take the same loyalty model into gambling, and instead of steak knives, it's bonus bets, free spins, or VIP checking on your car park or something. But here's the difference. Your supermarket doesn't profit when you go bankrupt. Gambling rewards aren't about giving back. They're about pulling you in deeper. Retail rewards nudge your shopping. Gambling rewards weaponize your behavior. Same playbook, much higher stakes.
So, Nicola, tell us a little bit about how you got into this professional niche that you're in, and with pragmatic practice, being specialist in this particular field, this doing this very important work. How did you develop the skill sets, and how did you cultivate this ethical framework that is clearly guiding the work that you do?
How did I get into this type of work? I worked in pubs and clubs in the late 90s and the early 2000s in Australia. I saw the change in the landscape of the front bar and your local golf club. And I also started to see the human cost of pokies up close. So not just numbers on a balance sheet, but people's lives. And they were starting to unravel week by week in front of me. So that's what pulled me into behavioural science, trying to understand why we do what we do. But I also wanted to look at beyond just the individual lens, and I wanted to look beyond the machines to the systems and the environment shaping their behaviour, and try to understand how people were getting caught up in them. So that's what led me into behavioural science, Behavioural Science 101, which ended up to be an undergrad degree that took me into an honours degree in postgraduate education and a pathway into psychology. I've always been interested in gambling. I learned how to play blackjack when I was 7 years old. My family gambles on a lot of different formats. I was born in Belfast amidst the Troubles, and my dad and even my grandfather always told stories of going from the betting shop to the pawn shop and back and forward. Yeah. So, yeah, I found myself working in the industry. I saw things. It was like, I don't know if I pulled the curtain back or if someone pulled the curtain back for me, but once I saw things, I couldn't unsee them anymore. And it was really about the design of the systems, the environments, and the products, which ethically, as a woman and as a mother, just didn't sit with me. It didn't fit. And so, yeah, I went from a glitzy, glamorous role in industry with lots of free tickets, lots of big events, from the F1s in South Australia to any type of event that pulled a crowd. But gambling was deeply embedded across all of them. I was working in a community organisation for a long time in the Territory across this huge project they had around raising awareness of gambling harm, from card playing into commercial gambling. And COVID had kind of just hit the world and everything was changing. And so I took a time out, and during that time out, I created, in partnership with my business partner, our business, Pragmatic Practice. The reason why we focus on addictive behaviours is it's both of our areas of interest. We've come to it from different pathways. I suppose it covers across a lot of different works. People come into therapy with stress, anxiety, depression, trauma, loss and grief, and often tied into those stories is gambling and other addictive behaviours. So alcohol, drugs, pornography, doom scrolling, internet use disorder, shopping, eating. Although food and eating is a slightly different behaviour than all of the rest, because we've got a couple of different chemicals that kind of hijack our brain there as well.
And we also need to eat. So I can imagine that can be potentially more complicated.
So I guess my compass has always been harm reduction and honesty. I didn't come to this with judgment or moralizing. People gamble for all sorts of reasons, but when the system is engineered to keep people stuck, I think we have a responsibility to name it, to study it, and to push for change. My work is about creating safer environments, not shaming people. Behavioural science, but it's also about human decency and compassion.
So if someone is watching this program, listening in, and they have had a flutter or a series of flutters, and they're looking at themselves and they're asking some questions, and they are unsure as to how they would answer the question if their gambling habits are becoming compulsive or becoming addictive, problematic. What would you say to them? What would you say to someone as a general rule that you wouldn't necessarily have a chance to enter into a practitioner's relationship with, but just as a general overview for someone in that situation?
Yeah, so if someone's listening and unsure about their own gambling or even a loved one's gambling, I'd say start to notice the patterns, not just the money. Are you spending more time than you meant to? Are you hiding it from people close to you? Are you chasing losses? Those are big signals. There are red flags. Don't wait until it's a crisis, even small steps. So try to set limits before you play and notice the pattern, notice the urges if you're tempted to go over those limits. Take breaks. Talk to someone you can trust. If you're not sure where you're at, you can log on to gamblinghelponline.org.au and you can take a little gambling test yourself and see where you fall. You can reach out to Gamblers Help. They're a free, confidential, Australia-wide, 24/7, 1-800-858-858 number. You don't have to be at rock bottom to reach out. From a behaviourist view, it's not about willpower, it's about the environment. So change the environment and you can change the behaviour. So what I'm saying there is notice that if you gamble every Saturday afternoon on sports or on the races, see if you can have a break this Saturday afternoon and notice what goes on for you during that break. That will be your signal as to whether or not this pattern is becoming a loop that you're kind of getting caught up in. Sometimes that means you might need to do things like uninstall an app. Sometimes it might mean asking your husband, your wife, your partner to hold your wallet. Sometimes it might be having a chat on the helpline or with a counsellor. There's no shame in that. We've all had things in our life that we need guardrails for.
Absolutely. And I think that's extremely helpful. And for anyone who's listening to this, who has tripped into any of those potential behaviors that you outlined there, that would be really helpful for them. And just to return back to some of the scaling questions that we talked about, this idea too that, potentially if I might throw something in there, is that, maybe there are potentially less harmful ways. Maybe it's a poker game that's low stakes with your friends and family, and it's really more about the social gathering as opposed to the thrill seeking. Is that potentially an option?
Look, I think at some point in the recovery journey, it may be an option, but often it might feel like it's not at all the same experience that someone is seeking and that they've been kind of trapped into that loop. When we even talk about pokies and online gambling, it's a different delivery, same design principles. So they use the same reinforcement schedules and that rapid play and those inducements that keep you going. So I definitely think gambling as a social, as a more fun, as a more connected to your mates, with limits and all of those things in place along some point in a recovery journey. But often when people are looking at change, what we need to think about is the individual and the guardrails for the individual. But ultimately, when it comes to gambling, I think we need to push more from a ground up on gambling reform. We need the guardrails in place to keep people from falling into the harm of trap in the first place. And those guardrails will come when the environment is changed.
So that would be more top down from a policy standpoint?
Yep. Well, top down from a policy standpoint, but we already know that the government has all of the evidence. They don't have the will. So what I'm suggesting is that we also can push from a bottom up, and we can push for reform. We can have conversations in our clubs. We can have conversations around our kitchen table. We can ask our local members what they are doing on gambling reform to ensure that there's more guardrails in place and therefore people don't fall into these traps. So bottom up is just as powerful as top down. It's the small stuff. Parents talking to kids, mates calling out bullshit, communities pushing clubs to stand for more than just pokies money. That's the cultural current that shifts what feels normal. Without it, top-down rules don't land. With it, change feels unstoppable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're all stakeholders in this, aren't we?
We absolutely are all stakeholders. In Australia, we've got the privilege and right to reach out and talk to our local members. We can make appointments here in Darwin in the top end. We have access to them. We just have to be wandering around the Pratt markets on a Saturday and there they'll all be. So use your voice. Ask your local club at the next AGM how much money's coming from their pokey revenue and how much is actually going back to the community, because across Australia we know that it's probably less than 1%. So you've got a powerful voice, but from a bottom up, it can be about talking to your mates and going, hey, I've noticed you've been on the app a while. I noticed that you seem stressed. I noticed that you don't have any money for lunch today. Is everything okay?
That is brilliant. And I think it is lovely that, taking the moralizing out and looking at there's an environmental determinism to so much of this. And especially when this is algorithmically planned and scaled. Thank you so much for helping us understand this. Thank you so much, Nicola, for helping unpack so many of the design factors that are at play that are totally invisible to us as fragmented individuals, but add up to what is a system that, can potentially entrap us.
Change in gambling won't come from one big moment. It'll come the same way that harm was built, step by step, ad by ad, policy by policy. The difference is we've seen culture shifts before. What felt impossible then is what we're living with now. What feels impossible now will one day feel inevitable.
Well, I'll let you have the last word on that. Nicola, is there a website or a social media presence that you would, where can people find you?
I'm making a documentary and it's called Clubs at a Crossroads. People can check it out. I've got a website. Otherwise, I'm available and can be easily found on LinkedIn. Happy to connect.
Thank you, Nicola. All right, we'll be in touch.
Bye.
Take care.